Haven't had a chance to use that open in a while, but tonight we get a chance to do so, of course. Welcome back to another episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 195. Hard to believe that we're at that many, but we are. We're 5 away on the march, the Mike the New Haven March to 200, which we'll hit in a couple of weeks with a very special guest. I'll mention that, of course, as we get a little closer. But if you have not checked out the previous episode, that was volume 24 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad, with retired NYPD arson, explosion squad, and bomb squad Lieutenant Jerry Sheehan, who's one of only 2 men in NYPD history to have supervised both squads, supervising A&E for almost a decade, if not slightly over a decade, and the bomb squad for finishers from 2000 until he called it a day in 2002. So from one lieutenant to another, with my next guest, with a last name like the one that he has, becoming a cop was basically a given. And what's better is that he did become a cop in the city of New York. I say that because his last name, believe it or not, I'm not kidding, is Sherlock. He came on the job in 1985, and the next 33 years would see him hone his investigative skills in units like public morals, internal affairs, and as well as a 2-5 detective squad, of course, in Harlem, and the missing persons squad, where he would eventually get the chance to supervise over 22,000 missing persons cases, most notably, as we'll discuss tonight, the Aton Pates murder case, getting a second trial reopened in that infamous homicide in New York City in 1979. All these years later, they reopened it, of course, and that is retired NYPD Lieutenant Kevin Sherlock, who joins me now on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Lieutenant Sherlock, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. How you doing? It's an honor to be here, man. Can't believe you had a lot of good shows going on. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And if you have a question for the LT, either if you're tuning in tonight via YouTube or LinkedIn, fire away and I'll make sure to put it out there and make sure that he sees it at the proper time. So first question I always ask every guest, because you watch the show, is where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up I was born in Queens, in Jackson Heights, Queens, in around Junction Boulevard. And I actually, funny thing, my house, where I lived in my apartment building, lived Kevin Dobson. He was the guy on Kojak, Crocker. And he actually lived in the same apartment I was in. And so that was my first touch, I guess, with the police department. But anyway, I went from there to Sunnyside. And then my father was a super, in the house there in an apartment building. And then he bought a house in Woodside, and then I moved there and spent most of my years. But while I was there, not too long, my father passed away in a work accident. And so it was me and my sister, and my brother was about to be born. He wasn't even born yet. So from there, it was kind of tough on my mother, but she, thank God she got us through it. She did whatever she had to do. And, I was glad we were able to keep the house, and, it was a little tough, but it worked out. I started working actually when I was 12 in a men's haberdashery called Tweeds. And then, I worked at Alexander's, and then, I went to Catholic school, started off St. Mary's, then Christ the King High School after that. And, so I worked and went to school, most of the years. And then, then when I got older, I started taking all the tests. Like, even though my name was Sherlock, I didn't know if I was going to be, a police officer right away, and I didn't know if I could do it. I took every test there was, and this, I actually, then when this came up, it was big classes coming in, and then I got in 85, so there was a lot of people. It was, it was hard to get in back then. I think they passed me up once for something. I didn't have all my paperwork in or anything like that, but after that, I made a couple of, the other tests, but this was the one, I finally chose.
And I'm sure you were relieved that I'm not knocking either agency. Of course, I love those both agencies and a lot of the alumni of said agencies have been on this show. But I'm pretty sure you were relieved when they didn't say Sherlock Transit or Sherlock Housing.
Well, funny story. The one that I did was the first tri-agency test,
Uh,
and when I went down that day, they had me going all around to, first I said I was going to housing, then I said I was going to transit, and then but I didn't, I had a friend that was already in transit. I have a lot of good friends in transit, so I don't, it really didn't matter. But then, yeah, when I said I was going to NYPD, regular, I was happy about that.
And you were an active cop early on. I'll get to your arrest numbers in a second. And I want to shout out to our friends in the live chat. Of course, the big rig, the big man, Bill Ryan, the Ryan Investigative Group. He is a retired first grader out of the Arson Explosion Squad. Another retired first grader here out of the Hostage Negotiation Team is Christian Flood. And Joe Maliga and Christian Williams are here. And yes, Joe, the sad news, of course, not to make it somber, but this did happen. Two Rochester police officers were shot in the line of duty yesterday, and one of them, Officer Tony Mazurkovich, was killed in the line of duty as a result of those injuries. And we send our thoughts and prayers to him and his family. 29-year veteran of the force, tragically killed in a cowardly ambush, end of watch yesterday, July 21st, 2002. So Tony and his family are definitely in our thoughts.
To the family.
Absolutely. So, early on, sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just sending my condolences. Sad every day now you turn on the TV.
It's absolutely. I know it's a terrible thing. So thank you for making mention of that, Joe. So as I was saying, in regards to your career, you started out in some pretty interesting precincts. The Fighting Ninth, all of them in Manhattan, different parts of Manhattan, but all of them in Manhattan. The Fighting Ninth first, and I'll get to the 2-3, the 2-8 in a second. But working the Ninth, the reason they call it the Fighting Ninth is because back then, I don't know if it's still like this now. Back then, though, it was, as you guys like to say, rocking. A lot of crime, a lot to do. So, listen, the NSUs being around back then as they were, putting these young guys and gals in positions where, they got to hone their skills on the street. Do you feel that being in an environment like that, although understandably frightening for a young kid, it was better to start there? Because ultimately, listen, if you could conquer an area like that as a young cop, everything else would be easy.
Right. Yeah. No, I was very happy that I started out there. But like we were in the 13, we were in a couple of precincts. Well, we had one block in the 6th. Well, we had a couple in the 6th, the 10th, the 13th, and the 9th. But we were mostly in the 9th in Alphabet City because it was Pressure Point that started there. And basically, Pressure Point was basically going after drugs, and stopping the guys basically on the street, going back and forth and try to keep some semblance of order, But yeah, it was all happening and things were going around. The radio was jumping all the time. You had Tompkins Square Park there, like I said, Alphabet City. And, you were always busy every day. There was fires. It was always jumping, like you said, every day. But I learned a lot. And guys that I got on with actually in SU, some of them were already on the job and rolled over from housing and from transit. So they taught us a lot too. And, you met some guys that are already working in the night that they would help you out and, whatever you had. But you wanted to get involved into the radio and do things. And right, it's like baptism by fire. You got, to learn what you had to do fast.
So at that time, there's a lot of different collars you could make. There's drug collars because it's just, I think during the crack is whack era. There is, of course, the all-encompassing gun collars and everything else under the sun. Was there a specific, because every area has a specific vice, was there a specific collar that you guys were consistently making back then?
Well, it was a little bit before the crack, so it was, it was heroin, not big thing, heroin. Actually, my first arrest was a heroin. I had the guy. There was a headlight out on a Friday night. We pulled them over, and they didn't have their paperwork and all that, and whatever. We go, and there was at that time there was only one computer car like in the whole precinct, and it was an auto crime car. And the guys went by us looking at us, and then and then they came back on. The lights were out. They pulled behind us, get out of the car, and they're out with their guns. Well, we're still talking to these guys because they didn't have their paperwork and all that. And I'm like, no, let's find out what's going on here. And they pull out their guns and I'm like, oh my God, like what's going on? So like their cars wanted for a bank robbery in Keyport, New Jersey. So I'm like, oh good, we can toss the car. So, they're like, yeah, the car's wanted, and they're looking for a gun, did a robbery. So I jump in there and I found 80 bags of heroin. And then what they did was they bought $25 bags, and these guys were from New Jersey, and they would take the bags and they would, they'd sell. They would make 100% profit. They would cut them into 2 bags, So, and I found all the heroin, and we brought them in, and that was my first thing. But the desk officers there, like in the night, they didn't like the pressure point there because they couldn't do nothing with. Like they couldn't really order me around. They're like, "Where's your boss? Get him in here and let's." I was really like wasting, a waste of time because they had a lot of work. They wanted to send, like they like to send the rookies to the hospital, watch a prisoner or something like that. So they kind of didn't have any, time for me. So they kind of gave me a hard time, the first arrest. But and there was a lot of things. I had to vouch the car, the drugs, the money, and the questions just keep coming. Like, where's your boss? But you learned it was just a little bit of to what to do the next time.
Right, of
But
course.
it was big heroin down there. Like I said, the crack really, it was cocaine, but the crack didn't start until like a little later on, which it did. And then when it really hit back, it was up in the 2.8. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of assaults going on there, and Tompkins Square Park was all stuff going on there, pills and too, but everything.
No, definitely. It was an interesting place to be. We're talking with retired NYPD Lieutenant Kevin Sherlock. A few more shout outs in the chat. Peter Pranzo, another retired lieutenant from the job, street crime. Of course, he's here. He's always a big supporter of the show. And Bill Kennedy, a retired sergeant out of the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, alumni of the Lightning Bolt truck. Of course, 1 truck, but he also worked in 4 truck and 7 truck as well. You'll hear about that when he comes on the show in a couple of weeks. So looking forward to that. So, that brings us to Harlem, working the 2.3, working the 2.8. And I remember when I was down doing my ride along with ESU recently, they were listing all the precincts that they cover, and the 2.3 and the 2.8 are among them. And this is, again, these are high octane areas, as I noted in my outline, high crime, high octane. And if the Fighting Ninth was any indication, of what you were in for, here you go out to Harlem, where again, drugs are even more prevalent, guns as a result are even more prevalent. I imagine though, given what you were able to do in the ninth and given how busy you were, A, you craved this new challenge, and B, even though it was a different part of Manhattan, you were not a fish out of water.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to stay. And then I was hoping I would stay in the night, but they had a pressure point now up in the 2.8, so they moved some of the guys up there. And most of the guys actually that I work with were from Staten Island, down in the ninth anyway, and they had family on the job, so they kind of stayed there, more than I. So they needed people to go uptown, so they sent me up, which it was like you said, it was a different thing, but I knew, I had the bug, as they say now. I wanted to make collars and do more things. And then you go up there, and it was still very, it was busy, very busy up there. I mean, now we cleaned it all up, and now you can't get an apartment for like you could get a condo $5 million across the street. Then it was like you could have got I could have got a brownstone for $7,000 and just paid the taxes, but we didn't know back then, Yeah, if you fixed it up and because they were all burnt out,
right?
And there was some people that were doing that, not really cops, but people started doing that, and they put pressure on us to clean up the place, and so Harlem, Central Harlem 2.8 was one of the first places that started seeing this renaissance of cleaning up the city. So we were kind of ahead of our time before even everything started coming in. We had our pressure point going around, making arrests for everything, and then a lot of these abandoned buildings people in, they were dealing in it, and we would get them and lock them up, and they they shouldn't be there, then there's heroin was on like 16th Street. That goes back to the Nicky Barnes days. And then 123 Street and 7th was very heavy PCP. That was like people came from all over for that. And that's where I started out. That was like my main foot post over there. And that stuff knock you out just smelling it, And then we went over, then I moved over to like 116 with the heroin. And then later on, like, a couple of years later, then the crack took off, and oh my God, it was like there was all those people like buying all the time, but now you had lines, like the cheese lines they call them, and people were looking, it got bad because people then were robbing because they wanted that fix. They made the cocaine cheaper, so people, but they didn't stay high as long, I guess, and they had to get high again, so they need more money. So
Mm.
that's when the robberies kicked up. So robberies are up, burglaries are up, because people needed to make money, to get to get their product. So we were in
It,
the middle of all that, and we were busy every day.
it was a devastating effect on the area, and that's the thing. I mean, it's people when people realize or when people focus on drug trades within a given area. I understand there's a lot of debate now, and it's not for this podcast to have over legalization versus continuing the war on drugs and whatnot. But the negative effects, and there are many, is not just those dealing narcotics within the area. It's the desperation from those who want to get narcotics that come into play as well. Because when you have an addict to anything, not just drugs, alcohol, gambling, any other vice that you can think of, they will do anything. They get to the point where they will do anything to obtain it, whatever it may be. And unfortunately, you saw that play out, as you said, in robberies, sometimes even murder. Sometimes you break into somebody's house because you want to be able to get some money to go cop. Homeowner fights back, it goes bad. I'm sure you had cases like that too.
Yeah, we did, and unfortunately, too, even family people kill their own family because they couldn't,
Hmm.
when they get on, drugs, people, they get kicked out of the house, whatever. Even it's their mother they're fighting against, and sometimes it just happens, after this need to get high, they end up killing their own parents.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of violence. Yeah, I mean, we had some nights that would be like there was a couple of shootings on the same block, and one had nothing to do with the other. And it was the same block. You're like, oh my god. You're just happy everybody was, everybody went home safe that night. And that was more than one, there was a couple of nights like that.
We have somebody here that watching from LinkedIn, courtesy of, again, LinkedIn, of course, Joseph Conway. He says, Kevin's the best. Go for it, brother. Joe Conway. So he wishes you well.
What's up there, Joe? God bless you.
Thank you, Joe, for tuning in tonight. And like I
So,
said, you got to.
we had a good, we had a good, good bosses there too. We had Chief Matarazzo. He was Captain Matarazzo then. He was, he went on to street crime fame, the detective, chief, and who worked with Chief Animal, and later on in the 3-2, he was his XO. We had the famous Lieutenant Quinn. He was uh, he was like this up in Harlem. Everybody loved him. The people on the street, but he always gave people he was never vindictive or anything. He always gave people the right way to go, and he was always able to talk people out of things. They'd be on the street going crazy, and he'd be able to talk them down. It was amazing. So we learned a lot from that. And Cesar Aponte was a Bronx cop. It was my sergeant. He was a great guy. And we had a great bunch of we had about 30 or 40 people in SU. I mean, in pressure point. Sorry, working together, and we were on foot post, and we were out there every night. And usually when you were precinct, you would go to like a squad, but we were in pressure point like about, I don't know, 2.5 years before we went into the 9 squad chart then, which you did days, nights, and midnights. And that was before they went to different, steady tours, and that's when everybody says that, everybody got along because you worked with everybody. Everybody knew everybody. Later on when they went to steady tours, you only knew half the guys, or girls, you know, by working a 9 squad chart, but I used to hate the midnights, because you didn't know what to do. Like, when do I go to sleep? When do I eat? What do I do?
Exactly.
So, but fun. It was fun.
One thing I will say is that, early on in your career, you're seeing all this stuff play out. You're talking about the shootings in the same block and they're unrelated, all the bloodshed, just all the heartbreak. And even though it's a funny career at the same time, because you do see a lot of hilarious stuff and you work with good people. Um, that said, I mean, there had to be a point, at least early on. And if there wasn't, hey, tell me that as well, where you were saying, man, holy crap, what have I got myself into here?
Yeah, of course. In the beginning, you're like, this is pretty, pretty intense. It's Like I did, yeah, I did kind of say that, but like if you would go during the time, sometimes you go on, to go downtown, or you go down to the 19th to work, like robbery posts, and you're like, I didn't like that. Like people trying to tell you, what to do, and you didn't seem like they didn't really need your help. Like they talked down to you. So I was wanted to be back up, back up in the 2-8, and I mean, you felt too that you did help people because people needed your help, and you did. People had to go to hot. People were injured. People they didn't have the money to go get other people to take care of their things. They had to do it themselves, and growing up in the city myself in the Queens, and like I understood that, and I felt like I was doing doing better, like helping people that needed help. Not people that they when you go down to the 19th, they're yelling at you about like why doesn't this guy's double park? Why don't you give him a summons? And then somebody's jaywalking across the street. Like, what are you doing? Just stay here. And I tell him, have a nice day, sir. That was it. But it just felt like you were doing, more, of God's work up there.
No, of course, and
But
that's the
it does.
funny part. Go ahead. My apologies.
No, but you did sometimes think like, what, it did get after a while. It did get, you start to get burnt out. You're doing that all the time. You're looking for a break. And that's what
No, of
happens with
course.
a lot of guys when they do, a couple, 3 to 5 years. I ended up like being in the 2-8 for 7.5 years.
Mm.
But after 4 years doing that all the time, then you go and, you go to a sector and you're running on the radio all the time. I mean, that's why, like I told you before, like the desk officers, when the rookies come in, they want them to, to help them with the guy. They want someone else in the car. They need someone to go to the hospital, and you can't do that because they can't touch you. So that's what they got mad about. It wasn't not personal, But you do that every day, and sometimes you don't get meals. You take your meal in the car, or then sometimes you're hoping you get in the rest real fast, so you get off the street because sometimes the arrest like calms things down, and you're hoping for it fast. You don't know every day is different out there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And the thing about it, I guess it segues perfectly into what I wanted to talk about. I mean, early on in your career, you had accumulated 250 arrests. Now, I've always found, and this is just an outsider's perspective, I'm learning more the more and more of you I befriend, the more and more of you I interview and talk to on this program, about how the department views active cops. And it's almost like the department, in a sense, they want you to make collars, but they don't want you to be active. And what I mean by that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is as you said, it does take you off the street and you have to process these people. And at least back then, I don't know how it is now, guys would tell me it would take like 24 hours sometimes to process somebody
Yeah.
through the courts. So you're talking about making these collars, which is good. But I guess, because the cop's off the street, the boss probably wants to pull his or her hair out because it's like, okay, now I'm one guy or one gal short. So as far as being the guy that was clearly a magnet for collars, how do you feel it helped you? And was there an aspect, if at all, where it might have hurt you for the reasons I just mentioned or other ones even?
Well, I mean, a lot of I also was in PMD for a while too, where you make you make a lot of collars, just on one. Like if you're locking up like an illegal, bottle place or a numbers hold, you might lock up 4 or 5, 6, 7 people. So that happened a couple times then. But when you're on patrol, you're probably going to get like 2 or 3, maybe 5 in a robbery or something, But yeah, I mean, sometimes they got mad at and then you're getting overtime too. They want to keep that down. They don't like everybody getting overtime all the time. They think that that's all you want to do. I mean, but the bosses were good about it. Nobody ever really held it like personally against you. I mean, some guys though would arrest anybody and they would get in trouble like as soon as, or they were coming back from court and they locked somebody else up like. You know, I mean, they weren't back in the precinct yet, and they're making an arrest. So there was a couple of those guys, and they were told, like if I was working with them, I'd have to make the first arrest, and then they would make the next arrest. So that was a guy that would be have like more time than me, like when I was like a rookie, like working on the midnight. But he was pushing me like right out the gate, like let's get an arrest for you, so I can get one. I mean, some guys were machines, and they just got it. So those guys, mine were kind of paced. They never, but I made, but on pressure point, it wasn't really. They didn't really bother you. But when you got in a sector car, yeah, it was a little more because they wanted to keep the car out there. And they didn't
Right.
want you to really make, like, a stupid arrest. If you're making a felony arrest, well, they gotta. I mean, we'd be turning out at midnight sometimes. Listen, we walk cars. If you're making a felony arrest, like don't go out there and start a fight, start something where it's it ends up it's a misdemeanor. We want to protect each other too. It's to protect the other cops. You don't want one car out there because things could slow off. People start fighting out there, and all of a sudden you're out there dancing with somebody, and you need backup because some nights like to be nobody out there knows somebody you get out and it just attracts the people, and the night when they're all drugged up and high, it's like a magnet, and they all start coming, and airmail starts coming down.
Mm-hmm.
You try to avoid that, and you got to call for backup. And then back in the 80s, and in the old 6th Division, you'd get the whole 2-3, 2-5, 2-8, everybody coming sometimes, because it would get hectic out there sometimes. And I remember we'd always go up to 155 and 8 up the polo grounds like once a night, or over in 1900 Lexington Avenue 25 during midnights. At least every once a night, just to make sure everybody got out of there safe, and with back proceeded back on patrol. I mean, that happened a lot. So that was another thing that the bosses wanted to keep that everybody was safe. They made it home that night. That was a big job.
No, of course, and it made sense, and it's funny to see how different police departments operate because we were talking about the show Cops off the air, a show I was going back and binge watching the old episodes earlier today, and there's one episode they did it in Indiana in 1999, and I was picturing this. I'm like, oh, knowing what I know now about how arrests are processed and how the process at least works for the NYPD, it's hilarious. So they made a good arrest on one guy where he had committed battery on his wife, and that was a fine arrest, obviously in a situation like that, it's a must arrest as it is. So they got him. But the second arrest I'm thinking of, which I'm like, I wouldn't have done this if I was a cop, was some guy. He was drunk, but he lived on the block. He was walking home, and they collared him for public intoxication. And to your point, all I can think of is, God, imagine. Okay, you make one good arrest in that situation where a guy assaults somebody, you got to bring him in. But the other collar, nah. If it's not something serious, you got a guy. Listen, is it good to be drunk in public? No, but if he lives in the block, you guys probably would have just let him go home because it's the same thing you just said. You don't want to end up in court again.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that happened. Like, actually, after my first arrest, when I got off I had to take the bus back to the night precinct Dodge or something, and a cab driver pulls me over and says some lady just ran away, just didn't pay her fare. I'm like, I just been up for like 30 hours, and I'm going. The lady I wanted to do is run. I go, where is she? He's like down the block. I'm like, oh my god, I got to run after him. I'm dying. I'm still like back then when like my first, I was still in uniform for the whole rest. I'm sweating. You didn't get it. I don't have. I'm going to the night. That's not my precinct. I didn't take a shower yet. And anyway, I run after. I find that she's well dressed woman, a businesswoman. I'm like, you got to give the money back to, pay your fare. You can't just, I'm going to have to lock you up, but I really don't want to do that, So she finally, whatever it was, she gave me $20. I go back and the cab's gone. So now I'm like, what am I going to do? So I went into the precinct, and who's there but the same officer that yelled at me yesterday. What had nothing to do with me. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do with this? I ended up vouching, of course, but like I was asking, you didn't want to talk to the desk officer because he was mad for me last night. And now you got to, you're coming in with this new story. You got $20 bill, $20 bill, and you just don't want to get into it with them. But that's basically what it was back then. You really didn't want to. If you could tell someone to move on, and that's why a lot of the cars they didn't. If there was somebody was smoking a joint, they'd knock it out of the guy's mouth and move on because they couldn't pull a car out of service for that.
Right. Made total sense to do that. Now, I do want to talk about public morals for a second, because the thing about PMD is that, you don't see that's it. That's a real product of a bygone era. You don't see that now, because mainly because, and this is a separate conversation for a separate day. Morals are so, or the lack thereof, are so convoluted nowadays. But really, back then, think about all the things that are flying now that you're seeing on the streets of New York City now. Back then, there was not only a disgust amongst the police department to see these things going on, but citizens felt an equal disgust for it too. And they genuinely wanted you to be out there and enforce these things. And that really, it got punctuated all the more so under Bratton once he came in. But if you think about it, having a public morals division or a vices division, that was broken windows before broken windows.
Yeah, but I mean, they've had public morals, before that, for years.
Right.
But the thing was, still, yeah, you say it's broken windows, but you make prostitution arrests, and they were, the prostitutes were out before, you got back back to, to the thing. But it was to keep some sort of order, some sort of, not to make it totally, crazy. And they knew, I guess they knew sometimes when to do it. And then the numbers, that was another thing. I mean, there was a big guy. His name was Spanish Ray, and he used to do the numbers, I guess, for the mob, and didn't have a good, but he was the big guy up at home, and he had all the places going. And we did one day. We were involved in this big operation where every number hole in the whole, like in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, ended up getting hit. There was a sergeant, and he turned out, he was PMD. He turned out at a 2.5 then, and that was his baby. He was always going after Spanish Ray. Finally, they get him. I think he sent like he had a farm in Puerto Rico, and he had a couple of hotels, and he had a lot, paintings, and he had everything. But so we ended up busting him, and all the search warrants were done all around the city, and all the stuff was brought in, and he got caught because he faxed something, or his girlfriend faxed something to him in Puerto Rico, and they intercepted it. And that was enough to get him. But after all was said and done, all he did was pay a $5 million fine, and that was it. I think he went to retirement then, but I'm sure he had more than 5 million. After all of that.
No, of
But
course.
people always talk about, yeah, the numbers don't hurt anybody. But yeah, but if I've had shootings where people didn't get their money. One time there was a guy, his uncle didn't get paid, so he went up to the number hole and shot it up. And then he runs away, and we follow him, and he ran into a bodega, and he almost started taking hostages, but that he didn't. But then he thought of it, took off his shirt, and he put his gun behind the Goya beans and tried to crawl out, but we caught him. So thank God, that could have been an ugly scene, but that was because of numbers, because somebody didn't get paid, or they didn't get, or then again, if you don't pay up, or you're betting or whatever, you don't pay, people get hurt for that. So and then they had the jiggle joints going. We used to hit, the topless thing, and then they would have these lap dances, they were called. So we would try to stop that, or some of them wouldn't have beer licenses, so we try to see if they were selling beer, get summonses, or they would get nuisance abatement. We close them down. So there was always things going. Then you had one time, we would go to the Marriott Marquis that had, they had prostitutes in there, but they were kind of hard. You'd have, talk to them for a while. You couldn't just, go in and arrest them. And you had to have like a story. You couldn't, because they would see if you were a cop. They were a little smarter. So then they wouldn't go with you. But so you'd have to spend a couple of hours with, talking to them, and eating and drinking, basically, and then finally, if you would get them, you go up to your room, and then when the door opens, the rest of the posse's in there and she's locked up.
And that to me is as before you continue, is so hilarious thinking back on it, because that really, you saw this a lot under the Bloomberg administration too. It's little things like that. It's all really so connected. And you might think, like, for example, you're seeing this now with people, the debates going on about jumping the turnstile. you can say, all right, it's not that big a deal. He or she just decided not to pay their training fare. Should you do that? No, but come on. I mean, don't arrest somebody over that. But as you said, it's not the fact. It's not that act alone. It's what that act that is relatively minor in the eyes of the general public is connected to. You don't know where that person's coming from. You don't know what circles they run in and what they might be linked to as a result of that. So that's where quality of
Right.
life offenses are so important to enforce because, again, running numbers, playing dice in the corner, all right, you may not think anything of it. People get shot over it. People get stabbed, assaulted in general, get robbed, get killed. And Bill Ryan of the Arson Explosion
Sure.
Squad says, I investigated many arsons to number spots in the 3-4 precinct. So there you go. Look at that. So that's it's an
Yeah.
important thing to enforce. Now, I want to get to 1997, and we're talking with retired NYPD Lieutenant Kevin Sherlock here. Mike Alcazar, retired NYPD detective, is watching, by the way. Says Kevin is a well-respected boss in the NYPD. So, hey, Mike, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure you remember him well.
What's up there, Mike?
Good
Good
man,
man,
Mike.
Mike.
Very good man. Very good man. He was just, for those of you who follow police off the cuff, he was just on with my friend Mark DeMeo. So go check out that episode of After Hours with Mark DeMeo if you have yet to. So you make sergeant in 97. By this point, okay, you got 12 years on. Some guys want to be a boss and they thrive in that role. Some guys, they realize later on, you know what, maybe I could take the sergeant's test. Some guys want nothing to do with it. Which camp were you in? Well, you weren't in the
Well,
first one, that's the at least. The more than one I just mentioned.
well, I took the test. Like the first test was back in '88. I took it, and I died on the list.
Mm,
But then I was in PMD, and I took a test that I didn't study for. But then when I was in PMD for a while, then I wanted to study, and then the next test was the one I studied for, and I studied hard, and between my time and medals and school and everything, I got and I had decent marks. I was like in a second, third group from that new list. So at that time, yeah, I really wanted to, and I wanted to move on because, actually, and part of me was like saying like some bosses like I wanted to again to help cops because like some bosses like didn't really care.
mm.
It seemed like they just wanted to do their 8 and leave and whatever. And to me, it was like now I'm starting to get time on the job where I was able to maybe tell people how to do it the right way and show them, not just like all right, you're here for roll call, get out in the streets and make sure you sign out on time.
Mm.
And some people like that, but I wanted to then, and it made me study and so I was happy, then when I got sergeant. And then I was in, like I said, the 5-2, where there's another. That was a busier place than you would think, but it was very, very big, and it bordered on the 4-6 there. So, there was jumping spots there too. But the thing about that place that it was so big is the thing that really, you were always running from one place to the other, and
Right.
um, and then of course, you had guys in the Bronx Zoo over there, and we had guys in the Yankee Stadium detail too, which was a good deal back then, But the only thing I didn't like about like I wouldn't mind working here, and I was asked a couple times Yanks, but they weren't making like overtime in cash, it was just time. And then when the Yankees are playing, you're there all the time, but then I didn't really like that setup.
No, of
So,
course.
but,
Oh, thought I lost you there for a second, but you're back. No, and it's funny. I always bring this story up. There's a great clip when the Yankees were playing Texas in the '98 playoffs in round one. Shane Spencer, when he was on that tear and he couldn't stop hitting home runs, he hits a home run out to left field at the old place, and it goes into Monument Park, right in the netting area. It bounces off the netting they had so that the monuments wouldn't get damaged, and a cop catches the home run ball. That Shane
oh
Spencer had
wow,
hit. He's wearing a PD jacket, and you got two guys there, and they both in uniform, and they both leap for it, and one of them gets it. So it's a great detail that way, especially during that time when they were playing so many playoff games. And my friends in the bomb squad can definitely attest to that because they were out there too. Now, I do want to ask about this. I know I don't quite know if you were working this night that it happened or the day after, but January, I believe, was 19th, 1998 is when Sean Carrington in the Bronx gets killed in that undercover buy and bust. Now I can't remember which precinct he was assigned to. I know you were in the 5-2 at the time. I don't know if you went to that scene or maybe the day after you might have went out there, but were you involved in the investigation into his murder?
No, I wasn't involved in that at all.
Okay. All
No,
right.
not Sean. No, but he
Mm.
wasn't. No, he wasn't in the fight. So I think it was a 4-6. I'm not. I don't know why I'm thinking of 4-6. I really don't remember what. But I think it happened on the concourse, though, didn't it? I really don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. It was the night of January 19th, 1998. I think it was either that or Morris Heights. That's where it was. Morris Heights is where they were doing the buy and bust. And unfortunately, this guy had just got out of prison um, and opened fire on Sean and his partner. There was a shootout, and the perp and Sean were killed. So I figured since it happened in the Bronx, maybe you might have been there for that. There was a couple of really tragic cop killings during that period. Sean and Brian Jones was in the Bronx. I think Federico Narvaez as well. Vinny Judice, who was a 4-6 alumni, but he later went out to the 5-0. Same thing. So I guess that brings us to 1999. After a couple of years of honing your skills as a sergeant in the 5-2, you go over to IAB. Now, I've had this discussion before with my friend Darren Porcher, who did some time in IAB. The way IAB is portrayed in cop shows, and even the way some cops in real life feel about IAB, is not necessarily positive. And it's not that those cops have anything to hide per se, and that they're guilty of serious wrongdoing. It's just, they call them the rat squad because they feel like IAB is nothing more than a bunch of zeros who nitpick a cop for wearing the wrong socks. But really, it's more than that. So even though it's maybe not the ideal unit that a cop may want to go to, somebody's got to make sure that all cops are doing the right thing. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are cops who are not. So being there for the
Right.
time that you were, how eye-opening an experience was that for you?
Well, I was 1999. Well, what happened was you're a sergeant. Like I put in to go to basically maybe to a detective squad or to OCCB. Like they get a chance to pick you, but IEB gets the first dibs on you. And since I already had investigative time, they took me. But I was I didn't really want the time, but everybody says you have to go, you should go, whatever. But I was lucky where the school the schools just got underneath like the Giuliani at the time. So the school safety people, the guards there became school safety officers under the NYPD. So that was my job. I got assigned to a place to investigate them. So I really didn't investigate police officers per se. A couple of times I was in on some of like the call outs. You get called out to a scene where cops were involved, but most of the time it was these school safety agents. But that was another thing too, because they just came under the NYPD. So there was a lot of them that were bad. Like some of them were gang members, and they would try to recruit kids in schools. And there was a lot of things going on. That yeah, because they weren't used to it. So a lot of them were fired, and some of them were jailed. But you had and then of course there was also the other reverse too, where people were like had a call against them for say, like having a fight with a kid. But then I would go down and have to GO them to interview them about what happened. And it turned out that like it was one time I had a female and she was dead. This person took a nightstick off her and started beating the hell out of her with it. Like, and she was scared to hit the kid, and she hit them back. People can. She was totally right in what she did. You know, but she was scared to say it. That was another thing. Like they didn't know what they could do and what how they use force actually against these kids. But the kids were out of control too. So I mean, that was another thing that besides seeing about IAB, but that Giuliani took when they school safety took over the schools, it was a big improvement. I mean, I know now too. They always talk about getting them out of there, but it was definitely a great improvement the way it used to be. Like going to schools and you had a problem like talking with the teachers. You always had to get unions involved, and they were always putting up walls. They didn't want you to talk to them. And then, of course, sometimes investigations you end up where teachers are involved, but you can't investigate them. So that's a whole, that's a different arm of investigation. So things got, kind of crazy there. But I think that it was a great thing that, and then, then the school safety agents, they were able to get, become police officers, which they do. I mean, it's, it's great. It's like a career path for them. So that's something they never, able to do. And it gives you, it gives them pride to do this job, and then they can become a police officer one day. It's just like
Right.
the traffic agents too. Like the same thing happened, with that. So I think it was a great job that Giuliani did as far as that was to get everybody, under the same, umbrella. And like I said, now they always trying to break them up and get them back underneath the board of ed again, because it's their own fiefdom over there. They take, they do their own world, and they don't want anybody, getting involved in that.
Yeah, that
Unfortunately,
is it.
that happens with a lot of even schools. They don't want police in the schools anywhere. So
Yeah, no,
that's a problem, I think, all around.
and there, not to mention early on, there was a tragedy with Orville Williams, who was a school safety agent, if you remember, in November 16th, 1999, that he had broken up two fights in the span of 5 minutes. The guy was running up and down the stairs, and I think he was a young guy, too. He died of a heart attack right then and there. So there was a line
Yeah.
of duty death there early on. I don't know if you investigated that and saw what happened there. But it was definitely, you know what, it's a good stepping stone. It's the same thing in the fire department. If you want to be a firefighter now, you work EMS, and it's good. And it's funny you mentioned that, because really, if you look back on the Giuliani years, it was the administration of the merger. The first thing he did, obviously, was consolidate NYPD with housing and transit. Then after that, EMS with the FDNY. And as you said, school safety into the NYPD. And now, I mean, listen, if you want to nitpick how certain things are run or aren't run, okay, that's one thing. But at least everything is under one umbrella, and it's not, so to borrow a word I used earlier, convoluted now as it would have been, say, if we were having this discussion in 1994.
Yeah, it's. I mean, everything had its, as far as the transit and housing. I mean, those guys like to. I mean, I think it's hard, but they still had, when they were in charge of transit, they had their own place. Like, it was. But I liked everybody was together on the thing. But they knew their job. I don't know if it's more convoluted now. I don't know. You're not. You can go from basically one place to another. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're focused on that one job. But going back to it, like what you said before, like about jumping the turnstile. Yeah, it's number one. That's how that's how you stop crime in the city. It all starts there. A
Little
big a
things.
big reason. And there's no
Yeah.
reason. I don't know why the DAs don't. They don't. They have to prosecute that crime.
Yeah, they used to,
It's
but
the only.
not so much now.
No.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I do want to ask you real quick though, because we were talking about this off the air in the lead up to this, and now that you're on the air, I can bring it up. You weren't in missing persons per se. You weren't officially assigned to the unit, but you were assisting them a little bit after 9/11 happened. And that is, I remember there was an episode of Law and Order one time, yeah, immediately after the tragedy, and Lenny Briscoe, the late great Jerry Orbach's character, is saying to Ed Green, because he's exasperated, they're homicide cops, right? So they don't want to handle a missing persons case per se, at least in the episode they didn't. And he says, why can't you just get missing persons to handle it? And Ed Green says, alluding to the event, he's like, I think missing persons is a little busy right now. And you guys certainly were. And it's an understatement that highlights a sad reality. So trying to trace these individuals, knowing probably that they were in those buildings or near them, and when they collapsed and were killed, even members of the service who were missing and were not recovered until months after the fact. Tell me about that process. And just, I don't know how else to ask the question. How does one keep their sanity looking at all these faces, knowing that they died the same death in this one horrible incident?
Yeah, I mean, that whole. I mean, when I started out, well, that day 9/11, I was interviewing survivors first, and then then that switched over. Like I interviewed, firemen and cops that to see if what they saw, and then my job was then to tell intel, and then the intel detectives would tell the FBI if they saw anything. So that's basically. But there wasn't that many survivors. I mean, I interviewed maybe 5 or 6 people that day. Then we go down to nine. Then we went down to ground zero, and we're helping out down there for a while. But then as a job evolved, it was more to deal with the people that survived and how are they going to find their families. And as you know yourself, there was no body. Sometimes the evap, was gone. So as we did that, we tried to get, it was a big, like, hard to figure out what they're going to do. But finally, with OCME, they started to, with the DNA to try to, if they get even a piece of somebody, hard to say, but and see if they can get some form of, you know, a toothbrush or a comb, and see if they can get a sample from that, and directly, you know, but you know they're still doing that today. I mean, it was very hard, and you're talking to me. I was talking to a lot of, you talk to a lot of the families and stuff. You can only do that for so long, and it was very hard to do. But this was something that was a little bit positive. At least you were doing something that was kind of, you know, proactive to get, for people to do something, that there is something to do, and then hopefully one day that they'll be able to ID that their member. I don't know. I mean, thousands of people have been, I guess, identified. I don't know the numbers, but a lot of people have been identified. But there's still a lot of people that haven't been identified, and that work goes on today, right now. As we're speaking in the OC, they're still testing and testing and testing. But it was, that time was hard for everybody. But it was, it was good that you were able to do something. And then looking back on it too, like there was a lot of respect, and everybody was happy. What job, what job what the police were doing, the fire department, EMS, the hospital. Everybody was behind everybody then, which we need that. We need that back again. And then everybody saying never forget. Here you are, what, 20-some years later, people forgot. You know.
Somehow.
But we have to keep that memory going, and we won't forget. And and the shows like yours, that keep that going.
I appreciate it. No, it's important to make sure that I was talking about this with Jerry Sheehan, for Tales from the Boom Room. I often, and for those of you that watch this show, for example, you may notice that when I do the Bomb Squad interviews, I always talk about Claude Richards, and you may be thinking, well, how many times are you going to bring the guy's name up? It's not that I'm obsessing; it's the same thing. I don't want people to forget about him, not just because of his heroism on 9/11 and how he died, but I want to make sure people remember the good stuff about him before that day, how he lived, the good things he did prior to that day. Every person, when I do my fireman interview, same thing. You may hear the same name a lot, but there's a purpose behind that. There's a reason behind that.
Right.
These names should not be lost to time. And I think that's one of the things the memorial says, one of them at least, down by the site, which is no day shall erase you from the memory of time. That is the case for Claude Richards. It's the case for a guy like Terry Hatton from FDNY Rescue One, who you've heard me mention a lot. Ray Downey from the FDNY,
Right.
same thing. On and on and on. For those of you in the audience, so there's a purpose behind it. So moving ahead, we're talking with retired NYPD Lieutenant Kevin Sherlock, and I appreciate all you watching tonight. A few more shout outs here. Ruth Ann Griffin, whose dad was an E-man, Leo the Spider Griffin, and of course, or Griffin, not Griffith, as I was going to mistakenly say, and Howard Blank, retired out of Taru. Thank you, Howie, for tuning in tonight. Howie will be on the show soon in short order. So making lieutenant, getting the 2-5. You're still in Harlem, well, you're back in Harlem now after a previous stint there working as a cop. So it's a callback now, but here you are, much more mature, much more experienced. You'd always wanted a squad. Now you have one. And the interesting thing about a given detective squad is that sometimes you will have guys that will work strictly homicides, some strictly robberies, and so on and so forth. But really, there's a conglomerate mix of things that a given precinct squad can do. And it leads to some really interesting investigations. And more importantly, really well rounded detectives. What did you most enjoy about running the 2-5? At least the squad, of course.
Well, I enjoyed, again, like, it was a busy place. There was, like, a bunch of different cases that that you would anything could happen there at any time. You weren't really. But then I liked it because it was busy because everybody was always working, and when people are busy, they don't have time to fight with each other or anything. It always keeps camaraderie going. And sometimes like if it would get dull or boring and there wasn't things going on, people start to complain to me about other things that I don't want to hear about. And then all of a sudden the bell would ring and everybody, this guy was just fighting with this guy. Now they're getting in the car to go out to the crime scene. I love that. It's like these guys hated each other a minute ago. Now they're the best of friends behind each other dinner. So I always loved that it was a busy place. But like I said, we had like a RAM team that did the robberies, and then we actually had like a burglary person. Then as time went on, the domestic violence, we had a person or two doing that. And then if you had a guy with the time, like he would be like the homicide guy in the precinct. But we had the homicide squad, of course. We would have case responsibility when a homicide happened, meaning that it was our case, but a homicide would come over and help us out. Our squad, we had a lot of that. Like I said, it was busy. We saw homicide guys all the time. They were over there a lot. So we got along. Some squads, and when it's not as busy, sometimes they don't get along as well with the homicide guys. Not that they don't like it, they just don't know them.
Right.
But thank God, we had a good rapport with them, a good work rapport, and actually, guys were like partner homicide. My squad, like they already had partners. Like when stuff happened, this guy worked with that guy, whatever, and they always knew, so it was like the greatest time. It was like I said, busy, but and we were always like we'd have to go down to Comstat. I have to go down to Comstat. So the 2-5 was always up in crime. So I was always up at the podium with the CO of the precinct, and they'd be asking me questions or whatever. And the thing about Comstat is you have to know what they want downtown, but you also got to take care of your guys. And there's some things you're doing the case you can't really tell them downtown yet because you're not ready to make the arrest. And downtown wants the arrest, yesterday.
Right.
But you also got to you work with the ADA, and the ADA we got to work for conviction. When you make the arrest, the case isn't over. It's going to go to court now. So for you to go to court, you have to have all the evidence and everything, in a row and a nice spot, and that takes time. And sometimes people, that you don't have the luxury of that time. But that was my job, basically, to run interference, to give these guys time to do their job. And then in the end, when he's in the box and he gives his confession, it's the greatest thing in the world. I mean, somebody who can rip off a candy store and they tell you, get the hell out of here. But somebody just killed somebody, and after talking to them for 5 hours, they tell you the whole story. It's amazing. The work that these guys and women do, it's amazing.
No, of course. And the thing about it is that at Comstat, now you were fortunate enough to miss the Anamone era meetings, and I say that with love, of course, because Louis Anamone's a good friend of mine. He's been on the show multiple times. He'll be back again soon. More on that, as we get closer in a few months. But he was no nonsense during his Comstat meetings. Now I don't know how often this guy was there, but let me ask you: if Chief Esposito, who was again another no nonsense character in his own right and the longest chief of department the NYPD's ever had, I don't know how often he was there at the Comstat meetings, but if he was it intimidating at all with him?
Oh yeah, it could be, but luckily, with me, well, sometimes he went, well, more probably the domestic violence cases, but I noticed with him, like he was, when he would say so, he was looking to make, he wasn't yelling at me, he was trying to make a point to the whole department, and I was happened to be the guy with the bad case. He was yelling at me, but I didn't take it personal. You know what I'm saying? It's like he's trying to make a point to the whole. I mean, nobody likes getting yelled at, but
Right.
Sometimes you get yelled at. Sometimes it's your time up. I mean, but I've been over at Comstat like I don't know, I guess 50 times up the podium, maybe more. I don't know, but yeah, it could get tough and other people. But like one time, like another chief was yelling at me. about grand larcenies, and he slammed the podium, said, when the 2-5 come down here, I don't want to talk about grand larcenies. I want to talk about robberies and shootings. Let's take a break. So I got off the hook there a little bit. But that's what my squad was. I didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough manpower to do all these grand larcenies,
Right.
You try to, you don't have the manpower.
You work with what you got, but that's hilarious to me because it's interesting and it's easier said than done not to take it personally, because you put me in that same spot, like I'm wilting. I'm going to be sitting there crying like a baby. Why haven't you made more arrests? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can. It takes somebody with a good temerity and a good demeanor to be able to handle something like that, and especially with guys like that are expecting so much and were former precinct commanders themselves. And sometimes you get a pencil pusher at 1 PP and somebody that really is only in that position because they smooched with the right people and they got promoted. But then you get the Animals and the Espositos. No, these guys were real cops and they still have that same attitude. And they love the job so much, you don't want to let them down. You want to make sure that every single time you're going to a comp stat meeting, you're giving them the best information, because these guys don't forget, and they still haven't forgotten in retirement, where they came from. And they want the best because naturally they want the department to be at its best.
Right. Oh, without doubt, and that's why they don't want to. And then if I wasn't a banker, like if I did have a banker, the next I'd want to make it better and fix that problem, because sometimes people go down there and they didn't fix the problem, and then you're like, they wasted their time. Then then it can get heated and adversarial very fast at that point,
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. You do want to you want to do good for them, because you want to do and for your people, and you want to protect them, and you want to do right for the boss, right? And I respected SPZ. I mean, I worked for him when he was in the 3-4. I was a rookie when he was a captain. They would send us up there, So I've seen him. Animal, like you said, he was gone. By the time I got there, he wasn't gone, but from Comstat, but I remember him, in the 3-2, and I worked for him. And actually, like, even he was the head of the when the Rangers won the cup, he was the head of the parade, and that was his baby. He was so happy when nothing happened.
Now, let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about, because there was a whole, right, because there was a riot in Vancouver, because Canadians, they riot over anything over there. Canadians are generally a calm people. You get them riled up with hockey, they will go crazy. So you're a big Rangers fan. So here it is, June 14th, right. 94, Game 7. And to set the stage, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because I would have hated myself to let this podcast go by without me mentioning it. They were up 3-1 on Vancouver. They were gonna, they had tied Game 5. They lost Game 5. They went to Vancouver and they lost Game 6. And it's funny because Craig McTavish, who was the last guy to play in the NHL without a helmet and was on that Rangers team from, the Edmonton Rangers, as they call them, and he was another Edmonton guy that came over.
Right.
He was saying, well, let's look at it this way before the Game 7. They're either going to build a podium for us or a gallows if we lose this Game 7. So either way, we'll reach new heights. Thankfully, it was a podium. So being there, you're a Ranger fan, you know the history, you know the weight. It's so anxious, especially that last 5 minutes when every Vancouver Canuck is hitting the post possible. When they finally won the cup. Tell me about just the feeling and just being in games, being in the arena for the biggest game to that point in the Garden's history, period.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I had Rangers, tickets and season tickets at that point, and I've been a Ranger fan for a long time, so it was all building. I was actually I was at a Rangers Stanley Cup game in 1979. Me and my friend Chris Malone, we scalped to get in, and we were at the game where they lost twice in overtime. The puck went in and out so fast they didn't even count it. They didn't have the the cameras back then to catch it. But that night, 1994. It was amazing. I was actually still in PMD, and they actually wanted me to go ticket scalp and like to lock those guys up. Like nobody can go home. I'm like, no, I'm going to the game. I gave 7 tickets. I'm going. And it was the greatest feeling. Like, you're right. The tension that was in there. And also, it seems like the last 2 minutes lasted 20 minutes. Like, when is this game going to end? And I don't know if McTavish might have taken one of the last face-offs.
He took the last face-off.
Larmer in the corner, like it was already past 0, and he was still playing. Like he didn't, it took a split second for him like to realize that the game is over. I'll never forget that. And everybody just going nuts and crazy, and then finally when Messier picked up that cup, it was like it was the greatest feeling. Like the sign said, "I can die in peace."
Yep.
you
You
know,
know, what was funny about that game is that, to your point, they had called a really nonsensical icing call because Pavel Bure, he just gave up on the puck and he was trying to get an icing call, and
right?
Kerry Fraser gave it to him. So Messier pulled McTavish over. Mind you, these guys had won cups together in Edmonton. Like I said, he said, it's 1.6 on the clock. They're not going to call a penalty here. Cross check them. So it was Bure against McTavish. Mac kind of hooked them a little bit, and then Messier cross checked them. But as you said, they're not going to call a penalty at that stage. So they ended up, the clock
Right.
hit zero, and they won the cup. But you were also, I think you were at the conference finals game 7 with New Jersey as well. Now that was even the cup final game 7 is one thing that was pretty tension filled, but this was too because Messier has the guarantee in game 6. He delivers on the hat trick. Here they are in game 7. They were seconds away, but I think it was Stefan Richer that tied the game with like 10 seconds left. And then there's these 2 overtimes that are heart stopping. And Mateau comes down now after the Devils get a really good chance to score on the other end. Richter stops him. Mateau scores. So being in in the building for that game, really in one of the greatest playoff series of all time in hockey history, at least. Tell me about that one.
Well, that was another, like I said, it was a real nail biter. And then when they tied the game up, the whole place died. Like I never heard the guy. It was like it was awake. It was quiet. And I'll never forget, like in between the next when they were going to overtime, like crowd started getting a little bit louder. But I went to the bathroom, and as I was in the bathroom, everybody's like, "We're gonna win!" People start yelling, yelling, yelling. And then as we were walking back out into the arena, it was like a crescendo of like the whole garden started going crazy. And it was like just then I was like, we're gonna win this game. There's no way we're losing it. It was just like it was back on again. And then when they won, it was that was the greatest game I ever been at. That one. I mean, it was great for game 7, but I had game 7 against Vancouver unless we won that one.
Yeah,
I'll never
no, I
forget
mean,
that.
listen,
That game.
no, and Jersey had a great team back then. I mean, that was the precursor to them winning their cups. Obviously, they had a bunch of Hall of Famers. I mean, Scott Stevens, one of the greatest hitters of all time. Scott Niedermayer, Marty Brodeur, Claude Lemieux was on that team. He ended up helping Colorado win a cup in '96 a couple years later. So that was a great team in its own right. And I think you were telling me. So this is funny. So they're having the parade, right? And these guys, listen, they'd had some fun the night before. And Brian Leach told this story one time when he was getting interviewed by Michael Kay, the Yankee broadcaster. And Michael had asked him, "Have you ever dropped the Stanley Cup?" And Brian said, "No, but I've seen it dropped. And you were there when I think Adam Graves, who might have been gravied up, shall we say, pardon the pun, dropped the Stanley Cup."
Well, they were out. I was assigned to the beginning, the parade that day, and I was assigned, where the formation was, and they were coming off, the bus, and they're coming the stairs. I don't really remember who, because I really didn't see that because my sergeant Peasley was was in front of me, but they were coming down the steps, and somebody like dropped the cup, it fell down. It just it didn't fall to the side, it fell straight down. So it wasn't cracked or anything like those Colorado, but it fell straight down. I couldn't, that I saw like Gravy, and Leach getting off the bus, but I mean, they were all, I forgot who was, but they were on that bus anyway. Who actually had it in his hands? Like I said, I didn't see it, but I slipped down. And then my sergeant was right there, and he he was a diehard Islander fan, but he was a Rams fan, and he goes, "Kevin, I think you should do this," and he pushed me towards the stairs, and I got to pick it up and give it back to Gravy and Leach were both there. I don't know who grabbed it, but it was like the great, I finally got to feel the cup, especially in that year, So I don't know who actually. I couldn't swear. I couldn't go in front of a judge and jury and tell you who dropped it, but somebody did.
I need to see a cup, man.
Yeah,
I've never seen a cup in my lifetime, and they came close this year. And I think that hopefully in the next 3 years they can get one. Because man, I don't know if between them and the Knicks, if one of those two teams ever won, and the Knicks almost won that year too in '94, they fell short to Houston. God, I'm gonna
yeah,
just turn into a blubbering mess if the Rangers or the Knicks go all the way one of these years. More so the Rangers because they're closer right now as it stands. Getting back to your career though, at the end you had missing persons for a while, and that was good. I mean, there's those cases with missing persons where okay, sometimes there's a family dispute. Somebody says, "All right, I'm just gonna walk off, let some steam off," but they come back, and that's unfortunate because family disarray is not the best, but ultimately it's not anything that has to be investigated. But there's those cases sometimes where somebody is adamant, no, this person, this is not like them. This is not like their normal behavior. Something's wrong. And you're in a tough position because you got to decipher what's, a crock of garbage and what's no, no, no. This person, there's some real concern here. We should look into this. When do you decide, all right, let's because manpower is everything, like you were saying earlier. When do you decide, all right, let's dedicate the manpower to this, or you know what, guys, let's do our due diligence, but we're not going to dig as deep.
well, after a while you get to, the precinct squad has it first, for like a week to 10 days or whatever, and then and hopefully they, there's a whole bunch of things they got to do, and hopefully they do, their due diligence in the beginning, so that when you get it, but you can tell because, I mean, if a person, especially now phones and stuff, I mean, people don't really shut their phones off, or you know, or they don't show up to. I mean, it depends on the person. But if a person goes to work every day and they don't go to, they don't show up for work, there's something going on here. I mean, you get if a person always goes out and this time they didn't come home, then they're probably in the field somewhere. But you get to know the basic person after what does this person do, their background, and that. I mean, fortunately, most of the time, they get found in a hospital somewhere. Maybe they got hit in the head or something. They forgot who they were, and then maybe a lot of times like the hospital call and we put the two cases together. Like something could happen to you, like say you're in Coney Island, but you live in the Bronx, and maybe you got hit in the head, on the boardwalk, and or you fell or something. You were unconscious and you had no ID on you. And then that takes a little bit, to figure out. But you usually do. I mean, sometimes the precincts even find it out themselves, but. And then sometimes people they cut out and, they go down to Atlantic City and go gambling and they didn't tell nobody. But, after a while, you'll get through that. I mean, thank God I really didn't have any people that, everybody there was a student from Columbia University that took off, but she was depressed and all that, but we found her and, she just didn't want to be found for a while. I mean, that happens sometimes too. But eventually, after time, they'll use their credit cards or they'll use something, even if they shut their phone off for a while. That most of the time they'll only do that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough, not to have, any case, cases like that was there at the time. I mean, there was old cases where people, disappeared, but and going back to the famous case of the
Yeah, let's talk
missing
about that.
child.
Let's talk about that real quick. That's the last thing I'll touch on before we get to the rapid fire, and that is Aton Pates. Now, they eventually did find his remains in the basement, many, many years later, and I think his killer faced numerous trials. The first trial might have ended in a hung jury. I can't remember off the top of my head. The second trial, I think, is where they nabbed him. And missing persons under your command had a hand in that. Because that, for those of you who don't know, Aton Pates, he would be 49 years old right now, but he never got to even get to adolescence, never even got close to puberty because when he was 6, he was abducted by this gentleman. It was a Hispanic gentleman who subsequently assaulted and murdered little Aton when he was just 6 in 1979, like I said. So working that, it is an emotional case because his parents, I don't know if they're still alive, but at least one of them was still alive at the time. So you feel like
Yeah,
even if
they're
it,
still alive.
yeah, so you feel like, even if it wasn't your case when it originally happened, you do owe it to this family to try to do something for them. Because, I mean, there's the classic question, well, what if it was your kid? Or if you don't have kids, what if it was your niece or your nephew, so on and so forth. So with that particular investigation, there's maybe detectives that are still around that worked it originally involved that you can get in touch with. What went into that one?
Well, first of all, they never did find Eaton's body. They thought that
Mm,
it was in a place on Prince Street. They did up, but the FBI did, but they never found it.
okay.
Um, what happened with because what happened was, well, he admitted to it, Pedro Hernandez. He was the. There was also there was another person of interest, a guy named Jose Ramos that that his girlfriend babysit Ethan Page, and he supposedly made some statements that that he did it, but he never but he never it was never that's who the FBI thought, but that it was never proven that. But the case now with with Pedro, he came to mind because in 2012 somebody called up and said that I think it was his brother-in-law called up the missing persons squad and said that Pedro, because that's the same time they were digging up looking for the remains. The case became prevalent again and out in the public, and he called up the missing persons squad and said, my Page guy to kill, I think, is the guy that killed that Eton Pates. And then this is the first time. Well, usually a missing persons doesn't get a homicide case, although this was made a homicide in absentia because they never found the body, but it was legally made a homicide. But this was one of the first cases where persons ever took a homicide case. So them along with Major Case and the case detective, David Ramirez. You had uh, Lieutenant Chris Zimmerman and Quinlan, the chief Quinlan. They kind of like took the bull by the horns, and then they had everybody working on it. But I don't know what transpired, but they were given permission to run with it. And as they started investigating, they started finding out that this guy Pedro Hernandez, he told a lot of people that he did this. He admitted to it over a span of years to different people that this is what happened, and this is what transpired. So they tried to get as much as they had no crime scene, they had no body, they had no evidence. All they have is Pedro Hernandez and what he said to people. So it was it's a very tough case. So and then you also had this other sidebar of could be another perp going, in on the side there. So it was a very tough case. But they got it, they finally got it to him. They got him to confess and to the police again. But keep in mind, he confessed to a church group. He confessed to his first wife. He confessed to doctors, although the doctors thing was that admissible court or not. But he said, over the years talking to different doctors, he confessed. He confessed to a lot of people, and finally the police. So what they did was they took him out and they did a walkthrough of the crime scene, exactly what happened. And they walked him, and they taped it, like, and show us where you put the body and all that. He said that Ethan came into the bodega. He had $1. It was his first time going to school ever by himself. He went in there, wanted to get a cold soda, and Pedro told him that he had a soda for him. And I don't know what happened, but we definitely think probably something sexual, but he never admitted to that. But I don't know, maybe Pedro hit him or something or with that, and he got mad and he choked him. He said that he was still breathing. He puts him in a plastic bag, brings him outside a couple of a block or a couple store fronts away anyway, and puts him in the garbage in a box and leaves him there. And then he walks away. He admits to that. He said he was never dead when I left him there. But then he went back. I don't know if it was the next day. He went back to check if Ethan was still there and on. And then that's basically that stuck with Pedro for years until he started. It was growing on so he finally started telling people. And then when they had one of the interviews on tape, the cops, I was watching it, and they were very good. They were they got him out to tell what happened. They were very like soothing, I guess, to him. They wanted him to tell the story, and they got his trust, and he did. And that's what good detectives do. They different people give a confession. There's different ways of going about it, but basically everybody, for some reason, they want to let themselves loose of what happened, what's on their shoulders. They don't want to jail, but they want to give up what happened. They want to share it with somebody. And I think a lot of people, if they realize that they could just tell you what happened and then go to jail, they would tell you. But I think over the years, that's what he's been telling people, and they got it to tell him, and that's what happened. So they had so he gets arrested. That was in 2012 that the case started again. He gets arrested. The first trial, one person, well, it was a hung jury. One person, wouldn't go for guilty. So now there's a second trial. That's when I came into the case, and basically you got to get everybody together again, and you got to get everybody to testify again. You got to get, and a lot of people, but they did for this case. It's hard. It's hard to do it once. You got to do twice and put the family through it again. That was very hard too. I mean, I went to visit the family. They lived like in a loft on Prince Street over there, and they since moved it. They're in Hawaii, but they never moved then. They never changed their phone number, hoping one day maybe they'll get the phone call. Very sad. But they never lost hope, and then finally after the second trial, they had two great DAs, Joe Seidelman and Jonah Lucy Osborne. She's I don't know if the Jew's gone now, but Joan ended up retiring. But they did the greatest closing. I mean, they put it together a great case, but the closing arguments by both of them, there's no way. It's so hard, like I said, before without the evidence. But the way they put it to it and explained it, and Joel did scientific, and then Joan did it more like, down to earth layman. And you put those two things together, there's no way that, you could not believe, that it believed it. And even when I first did get the, case, and I talked to Joan, I asked her, are you sure, do you think that he did it, Pedro? Not that I didn't think, but I just wanted to hear her say it, And she said it. So then, and then, we did whatever we could to put this case together. And it was great, great by everybody involved working together. And, I think it gave some closure to the family at the end. I don't think he can ever forgive Pedro, but, at the end, I think that, they finally did believe that this was the person that did it. And that, not that they were happy, but there was closure, It was one of the most amazing cases, that I've been involved in.
It's a solemn reminder of a sad time in the city, and there are certain crimes that really gripped the city. There was the Preppy murder, obviously the Central Park Five, the Central Park Jogger. Obviously Bernard Goetz during that era as well. This is in the 80s, but that was another one that really, really, Brian Watkins in 1990, but this one definitely gripped people at their core because of the fact of the victim and his age and the innocence of youth, and how that innocence was so brutally snatched away. Now, you retired in 2018, and that segues perfectly into the rapid fire. And one of the questions I'll ask you in it, Gregory Green says, thank you for your service. And thank you indeed, 33 great years. So now it's time for the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. First, and if you can't say it because it's not G-rated, then we'll skip the question. Funniest call you ever responded to?
I could say one that's G-rated. It's pretty G-rated. Me and my partner, Desi Stokes, was my first partner. We went to a job of as a family, not a family dispute, a neighbor dispute. And we go there and we talk to the guy and was like, "What's the matter?" And he says, the guy's roaches next door are coming into my house." And they go, "Well, how do you know it's his roaches and not your roaches?" And he goes, "Because I spray my roaches with spray paint." And sure enough, we look, and there's a whole bunch of roaches with silver spray paint on them, and these other ones are coming in. It's like, oh my god. So I ended up telling, listen, we'll get the super to get an exterminator over here, but don't be yelling at the guy because he can't play. They're not his roaches, But it was the funniest thing. He actually did spray paint these things.
Oh my goodness. Second most uplifting call you ever responded to.
Well, most uplifting call. I don't know. Well, it was uplifting that I got to. It was on 9/11, and one of the firemen ran through the. They ran through the tunnel,
Stephen Siller.
and I had to interview a couple. What's that? Through the
Stephen Siller.
No, it wasn't him. It was another
Gary
fireman.
Box.
I don't remember his name.
Might
I
have
mean,
been Gary
he
Box.
was all right. I mean, he
Oh,
wasn't badly hurt, but
oh.
he was one. I don't know how many of them ran through, but he was one of them. But anyway, he came through, and I told you I had to interview the people. Now it was like I was interview when I got to interview him. It was like 6 o'clock at night. I forget. It was pretty late in the evening, and I'm talking to him. I'm like, "Well, how long you been here?" He told me and all this, and I'm like, "Well, who knows you here?" And he goes, "I go, did you call your family?" And he goes, "No." He was like shocked. I was like, "Oh my god!"
Wow. It's amazing. That's quite the story.
So I got to call his wife and tell her, he was good. He was all right.
That's amazing. I
But I
think
was
I think
thinking,
about that. My apologies. Go ahead.
for 6 hours, this woman must maybe more going crazy. And you're not supposed to, you're not really supposed to call for the fire department to take care of your own jurisdictions. Like a fireman should have did that, but there was no one around to call. So, I did it, and it was like the happiest moment,
Yeah. Amen.
sad but happy. I got to, put people back together. I was like, it was amazing.
No, and I mentioned Gary Box earlier, Stephen Siller. There's an iconic photo of Gary, particularly running through the tunnel, and those two gentlemen I mentioned, Siller and Box, did not make it that day. But I'm glad to see that this man did. So third, when you look back on your career, and you probably thought about this when you put in your papers, the pension section in 2018. What are you proudest of in the 33 years you spent on the job?
Well, prior to just working with great people, helping people, but you meet like I'm sure like everybody probably tell you meet the greatest people in the world. It's not easy to do. It's not you don't get rich out of it, but it's a good job, and it pays the bills. But you get to meet great people, and have fun doing it. For the most part, 33 years. I mean, there was ups and downs. I'm not going to say there was no bad days. There was bad days too, but most of it was on the upside. And I would do it again. I mean, but now but I'm older now, so I couldn't. I wouldn't be able to do it now. When I'd done that, but I still think I would do it. If I had if the choice was given it to me, I think I would still do it again.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Well, most of them are closed now. But a good one was
Well, you can
one
go
at
to the archives.
yeah, Brooklyn, like Tom Tom, Two Toms.
Mhm.
You must have heard of that one, right? They had the big giant pork chops.
Yep.
We go there and they have everything's family thing except for the big pork chops, family sized portions, and we had great times there. Then if you go down to court, you had Fellini's Part F, and then Pine Tavern in the Bronx. Then in Woodside, we'd always go to Donovan's, which is still open. That place is still open.
Have to check it out.
You get burger there and stuff, and then it's been closed for a long time. But we used to always go to Rags from the 2.8 to 2.5, but it's been closed for years now. But it was a good place.
And then fifth and finally, what advice would you give anybody coming on the job now?
Well, I say it's a little bit. We've had bad times and we've got through them. Like in the '80s, we had cops were getting hurt and killed. Starting with Eddie Byrne and go. You can go on and on. Busack and Hoban, and and then, but the job's gonna always be there, and it was always good to me. It's good to people, and it needs good people. You need people that want to do it. It's a vocation. It's not just a job. You're gonna want to, it's kind of a calling, but you're gonna want to do it. Have to want to do it, and when you do it, I think you get so much. You don't get rich, but you get a lot out of it. And as long as you need a good family to back you up, though, because you're not going to be home a lot of times. But if you can get that, and you'll be fine. And I think you'll do well. And it's you keep your head high, and it's an honor to serve.
And before we go, and thank you for sharing that, and don't sign off yet. We'll say goodbye off the air. Is there any shout outs to anyone or anything that you want to give?
I just want to give out a shout out to whoever's listening to work with. Thanks, thanks a lot. Great work with you, and everybody that's on the job. Keep safe and keep well. God bless.
Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate your time. Like I said, stick around. I'll say goodbye to the audience in order: Bill Ryan, Christian Flood, Joe Maliga, Christian Williams, Bill Kennedy out of One Truck. He'll be on the show in a few weeks, like I said. Making sure I don't repeat the same names here: Joseph Conway, Peter Pranzo, Mike Alcazar, Howard Blank, Ruth Ann Griffin, John Steven Zaslavsky, John Latanzio. John, be on standby because I'm going to call you in a little bit with an idea. John, a retired housing E-man and also NYPD E-man out of 3 Truck as well as 5 Trucks. So, John, I'll call you in a little bit. And, of course, Gregory Green, thank you all for watching tonight. And those of you that may not have been in the chat, but you guys tuned in, appreciate it. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, John and Bill Kennedy, you guys know us, man. You worked with him, of course. And he went over to Truck 11 after a stint in ESU, and Truck 11 being the bomb squad, of course. His name is Mike Garcia, and he'll be here for volume 25 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad this Tuesday. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Lieutenant Kevin Sherlock, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Right, thanks.